Thank you, John, for that opening statement. Let's see how your case holds up against the juggernaut. In my opening statement, I showed that without God, we couldn't even be having this debate right now, and I presented 6 requirements for a debate like this, all of which support my worldview, not John's worldview. First, I argue that since the universe began to exist, it must have been caused, and this cause must be powerful, personal, timeless, and immaterial. John's only response was that cosmologists agree that there was no singularity. Let me quote you what some physicists and cosmologists say on this issue. Almost everyone today believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. That's Stephen W. Hawking and Roger Penrose. Those are number 1 and 2 in the world. From Helga Craig, no developments in science since 1970 have been of such a nature that they have seriously induced scientists to reconsider the basic elements of Big Bang cosmology. The world, so it seems, has not always been. Paul Davies, for this reason, most cosmologists think that the initial singularity as the beginning of the universe. On this view, the Big Bang represents the creation event, the creation not only of all the matter and energy in the universe, but also of space-time itself. According to Mark Kilger, developments led to the Big Bang being almost totally accepted by most astronomers. So I'm not sure where John is getting this idea that everyone believes in an eternal world when, according to people like Stephen W. Hawking, it's taken for granted that there was a beginning even to time itself. The argument from fine-tuning, I showed that the forces, principles, and constants of physics are finely tuned for life, and that this points to an intelligent designer of our universe. I didn't catch anything that would refute that. Third, I argued that complex biology points to an intelligent designer, and I offered DNA as an example of complex biology. John says that there are biological organisms that aren't perfectly designed as a response. Now, think about this. If I say God is going to design a laptop, how much RAM would that laptop have? Infinite, right? Well, I think I would ask, what's it for? If it's just for checking email and typing up some short papers, I would say God's probably going to give it enough RAM for whatever it's supposed to do. And when God creates the world, He's creating ecosystems. You can always, of course, improve an organism. So I could take a lion, and if I were powerful enough, I could make that lion run 1,000 miles an hour. I hope you're going to make the gazelles run 1,000 miles an hour too. Because think about this. If you say, I'm just going to improve this organism, think about the implications of that change. So God is creating organisms, and these organisms are part of an ecosystem. If you're just going to start changing things, those things can have massive effects. And I would just say we do remarkably well at what we're here for. Fourth, I pointed out that human consciousness cannot be explained in physical terms, and that this points to a supernatural world. I certainly didn't get any response there. Now think about this. John says that we reject science when it points in a direction we don't like. Think about this. These are doctors sitting in hospitals. They are performing an operation. Someone goes brain dead. The person comes back and can tell the doctor everything that happened during the operation, can draw the instruments that were used, and they say, I was watching the entire time. But instruments were hooked up to the brain, and the brain was dead. John rejects all of this science. Why? Because it conflicts with his worldview. Fifth, I showed that if naturalism is true, we have no reason to trust our reasoning ability. Since John and I obviously trust our reasoning ability, we're presupposing a higher origin of our faculties, and theism offers this higher origin. Now, people have trouble getting this point. Think about it. John's a naturalist. Beliefs, whatever beliefs he's presenting to us right now, are brain states. They're patterns of matter. Those brain states are physically determined by previous brain states. So his belief that God does not exist is some sort of brain state. It's determined not by rules of logic, not by careful argumentation and desire for truth. It's governed by previous brain states. So in other words, that pattern of matter is based on and determined by a previous pattern of matter, which is determined by a previous pattern of matter, and you can go on before John even existed. So what reason do we have to trust that these patterns of matter are true, or that the ultimate result is true? We don't have any reason to think this, and John hasn't offered one. 6, I argued that logical laws only exist in the mind, and that logical laws transcend our world, which means that there's a mind that transcends our world. Certainly didn't get any response here, but I'd like one, because anytime I hear an atheist using laws of logic and presupposing laws of logic when he doesn't believe in a transcendent world, a transcendent source of logical laws, I can't help but think you're not making sense here. So let me address some of John's other claims. He says, even granting my arguments, they would be consistent with other supernatural explanations, such as a powerful deceiver. And this is a very interesting claim here. Think about this. So supposing we grant my arguments that there's a mind that transcends our world, or that there's an intelligent designer or someone who finely tuned the laws of nature so that we could exist, if there's a creator of biology, if there's a source of human consciousness and so on, well, that could be an evil demon God who's doing everything he can to trick us. Therefore, we shouldn't believe in the God that all of the evidence points to. Now, think about what that would lead to if John actually applied that reasoning in other areas. So think about it. Suppose our topic tonight is, does John Loftus exist? I would say, I think he does. Look at him, he's over there. The fact that we're having a debate presupposes that he exists, so I say yes. And John says, well, a powerful alien could be tricking you into thinking that he exists. So a powerful alien could be tricking me right now into believing in John. Therefore, I shouldn't believe in John. I have to remain agnostic about whether John Loftus exists, because there are other possible explanations. I could be having a very rare, vivid dream right now. That would account for the same evidence. Therefore, I can't believe that John Loftus exists. If you applied this reasoning, what could you ever believe? If you get hungry right now, maybe there's a little monster living inside me that's telling me, give me food, and after he eats this meal, he's going to destroy me. Well, I better not eat then. I better not eat because it could kill me. Where would atheists ever apply this reasoning? Yes, the evidence points in this direction, but there could be some sort of powerful deceiver leading you astray. Where would atheists ever apply this reasoning? One place, God. Why the inconsistency? Why adopt the only methods you can use in order to avoid belief in God? Why constantly change your methodology in order to avoid the existence of God? I don't know, but it's interesting. He says, I have scientific double standards. I reject science when it shows that people don't rise from the dead, for instance. Well, science doesn't show that people don't rise from the dead. Science would show that people don't rise from the dead apart from some sort of supernatural intervention. If there's a God, obviously people can rise from the dead. But I don't reject science. I believe in natural selection. Why? Because we observe it. We observe stronger organisms beating up the littler ones and reproducing more. That's science. And so I agree with it. But again, think about the science that John would reject. Scientists have been trying for years to come up with some plausible scenario for the origin of life. They don't have one. But John says, well, they will come up with one. Well, if you think about this. Over and over and over again, we find astonishingly complex examples of biological complexity. When we get to a cell, we examine the cell. We don't find, wow, this is actually pretty easy to put together. We find, whoa, this is way more complicated than we thought it would be. And this points to design. John says, don't worry about it. We'll come up with an answer eventually. Well, if you're just going to reject, I mean, think about it. Supposing God created biology. And that would be the actually true explanation. Well, if you're going to believe in what really happened, if you're going to seek the truth, then you should be open to that explanation. According to John, even if that's what happened, you should reject it. So think about things like the origin of life, or the evidence of biological complexity, or the fine-tuning of the cosmos. That's scientific evidence. It points to a designer. Near-death experiences. That points to human consciousness surviving the cessation of brain activity. And John rejects all of this. John rejects all of this. Why? Because it conflicts with his worldview. He says, I use God of the gaps reasoning. Well, I suppose it's better than chance of the gaps reasoning. Anytime you can't figure something out, chance did it. Or you get a promissory note. We'll figure this one out next time. I don't use God of the gaps. If I see some gap in an explanation, I don't point to God when I see that something can't possibly be accounted for. when the evidence is so strong in one direction, when something is so powerful, then I point to God. I mean, think about this. Following John's reasoning, if I say, look, I see a laptop here, I say it's created. If you want to say, no, I'll come up with a naturalistic explanation someday, well, I mean, you can say that. You can say that, but I have no reason to trust it. If it's very, very complex and serves very intricate purposes, I would appeal to design every day of the week. And I'm sorry, but we're much more sophisticated than this machine. It says Christians value faith over reason. I don't think John understands what I mean by faith. Faith is a trust I put in God based on what I know. And I don't know of anything I believe about the existence of God that conflicts with reason. He says faith-based reasoning leads to all kinds of problems. I would be defending Islam if I'd been born in a Muslim country. He attacks the Bible, the doctrine of the Trinity. Think about this. John is saying, well, you're a Christian, therefore our debate isn't really about the existence of God. It's about biblical inspiration, biblical inerrancy, 66 books of the Bible, whether God is a Trinity. It's actually about almost everything except for the actual topic tonight, the existence of God. No, I'm a Christian. I have particular beliefs. If we're debating the resurrection, I'll defend the resurrection. If we're debating the existence of God, I'll defend the existence of God. John, if you'd like to debate whether Christianity is true, I hereby accept. But right now, we're asking a simple question. Does God exist? And that's what I'll respond to. Now, he says, if I were born in a different country, I believe in Islam, for instance. John, I was an atheist. You know that, right? He says, we just believe what our parents tell us. My dad told me he was God. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe what any of my family members told me. And when I came to theism, when I came to believe in God, I was sitting by myself, studying the evidence. That's when I came. There was no one there forcing me to believe anything. He says God could have communicated his will more clearly, and then we wouldn't be killing each other. If God had just made a commandment not to kill one another, well, then we wouldn't be having all these problems. John, have you read the New Testament, John? Read the New Testament over and over and over again. Love your enemies. Do harm to no one. Over and over again. The kingdom of God is not of this world. That's why Christians don't fight. So if you say, if God had just given us a clear command, then we would know. No, God could give us all the clear commands in the world, which he's done, and we're still going to kill each other. So, going to the problem of evil. I'll start a response to the problem of evil. I don't think I'll get very far. The problem I mentioned in the presentation earlier today is that John's actually being inconsistent. Atheists are inconsistent on this issue. When you have something like a fine-tuning argument, atheists will look for any reason to avoid the argument. Any excuse, no matter how complex biology is, no matter how much the evidence cries out for a creator, atheists will appeal to any possible reason for rejecting the argument, will throw out the entire argument. But there are tons of problems with the argument from evil, and according to atheists, it's still a slam dunk argument, no matter what problems there are. Think of the awareness assumption that I mentioned earlier if you were here. When an assumption is crucial to an argument, and there's no good reason to believe the assumption, the argument is on very shaky ground. Most versions of the argument from evil are based on an unstated assumption, which we might call the awareness assumption. According to the awareness assumption, if God has reasons for allowing evil, we would be aware of those reasons. Now, how can atheists even hope to show that this assumption is true? God's knowledge and wisdom are infinite. The smartest human being on the planet knows practically nothing by comparison. So why on earth should we assume that we would be aware of God's reasons for allowing suffering? There's just no reason to assume this. Yet without the awareness assumption, most versions of the argument from evil can't get off the ground. Now why do I bring up this? Because I don't think this is a tremendous response to the argument from evil. Certain other things I think are more powerful. I bring this up because it points out an inconsistency. The atheist says, what did John say? If there are scientific things that we can't figure out, no problem, we'll discover them one day. So why can't the theist say, well, if God has reasons for allowing suffering and we don't know them, no problem, we'll figure them out when we get to heaven? Why the inconsistency? Why must theists be omniscient, even when it comes to God's reasons, and yet atheists are free to say, I don't know how any of this works. No problem at all. Why the inconsistency? I don't know. But we're certain to see several more by the end of this debate, and I personally guarantee that. Thank you.
He's sure likable, isn't he? I'll get to proving why I opened the way I did during the one-on-one time. We're not here just to debate God's existence. He could care less if this God was a distant God or a deist God. It doesn't make any sense to want to even debate unless you're supporting a religious conclusion. Anyway, I'm going to make the case that, you know, if David and I are having this debate, that God probably does exist, and we're having this debate, and therefore God probably does exist. I mean, what's wrong, David? I mean, what's wrong with your arguments that, I mean, wouldn't you think, excuse me, wouldn't you just think that, wow, that you could convince everybody in the world? I mean, don't answer this rhetorical. I'm assuming the answer is no, you cannot convince everybody in the world. I mean, why are we even having the debate? I mean, you would think, we're not just talking about the existence of some nebulous God or a scientific God who's trying to figure out, you know, how we will live our lives or behave. I mean, that God is not worthy of worship. Let him defend that. You know, that means nothing to me. I mean, if that's the case, if that's all he's going to be happy with, then fine. But no, that's not what he's happy with. He's got to believe in the Orthodox conceived God. And if we're having this debate, then there must be something wrong with the evidence. I mean, come on. Are you really going to think that 4 billion people around the globe are just in rebellion against God, that somehow they don't want to obey the gospel because it'll cost them something? When we have Muslims who fly planes into buildings, how many Christians would say, I've got that kind of commitment? No, that's not the case at all. It's the evidence. There isn't enough evidence, otherwise there would be more believers, right? Now let me just address some of his arguments and see how I do with that in the time I have. He argued for the first cause and fine-tuning and cosmic constants and cosmic other things and biology and what have you. Let me just address some of these sorts of things. You know, he says that the universe must be caused by a timeless, personal, powerful creator God, ex nihilo. Well, you know, I don't know if you've really looked seriously at Genesis, but there is nothing ex nihilo in the first few chapters of Genesis. It's being created out of existing waters. The earth rises out of the water. In fact, Augustine is quoted as saying he didn't believe in ex nihilo in the 4th century. Aquinas talks about it. I quoted in my book. The doctrine of ex nihilo, out of nothing, wasn't something that was adopted or universally accepted. It's what happens progressively as religions evolve. Because what we find in the Bible, and some of it's covered up, is that what we find is a pantheon of gods in the Old Testament. You know, they're related, and there's archaeological evidence that God had a wife named Asherah. Now, you say, well, no, that wasn't mainstream Israelite religion. That's some kind of fringe movement. Well, what about child sacrifice? You know, more and more scholars are saying that that was accepted as mainline sort of thought in the Israelite religion, that they would be required to sacrifice children to Yahweh. But that too can be covered up a little bit, because what happens as these documents are edited and re-edited, they cover up things that they've changed their minds on by hindsight. And there's plenty of evidence for that in the Bible. So, you know, this whole sort of thing, I mean, it just seems like wrong-headed. A timeless God. Well, let's just assume that a timeless God did create the universe, okay? When did he make that decision to create the universe? You make a decision in time. I'm going to create it now. Now, let's say that the decision was an eternal one. Let's say, from all eternity, God decided to create this universe. Well, if he made that as an eternal decision, then the universe should always exist. It should always be existing, because it was always an eternally made decision. Because once you have a God who decides to create something in time, you've got something different than what you have when you have a timeless God. How can time begin? That's the question. And So we have to require a timeless God, but I see nothing in that argument that shows that this timeless God can create in time. That is a big problem. And a personal God. You know, what is a person? I mean, we have a personal God. Well, what is a person? All we know is persons have bodies. I know you're a person, you have a body, you walk, you talk, you think, you know, you do this. But what's an immaterial thing? Who is everywhere? What is that? Philosophers have wrestled with these questions, and to affirm that this God is personal is extremely problematic. And when you get into very arcane discussions like divine simplicity, where we can't even understand what God means unless he breaks it down for us and in Revelation, but the Revelation cannot be crystal clear because he has to break it down. See, divine simplicity, God's omniscience is the same as his omnipotence, is the same as his goodness. They're all one quality, one essential attribute. Well, what does that mean? We don't know. What does it mean to have non-propositional knowledge? God is supposed to have non-propositional knowledge. How can a God like that reveal propositionally? These are problems that philosophers wrestle with, and it makes no sense to posit a God at all. Now, David raises some questions that I need to answer. Like, where did reason come from? Well, you know, it seems like to me that somewhere along the line, someone saw an apple and someone saw an orange and said, you know, that is not that. Because if I want one of those, I've got to eat one of those. And if I want one of those, I want to eat one of those. And what if one was poison and one was an apple? Well, in order to stay alive, I got to eat the apple. That is not that. There you go. You've got the basic law of non-contradiction. That is not that. You extrapolate that into other relationships, and all of a sudden, you've got the basic rules of logic. If it's raining, it's wet. If there's smoke, there's fire. It doesn't seem to me too difficult to extrapolate from those basic sort of things, modus ponens, modus tollens, law of non-contradiction. And before you know it, you start saying, well, you know what? Maybe that applies over here. Maybe that applies over there. Are you really suggesting that because we have evolved that an apple is an orange and an orange is an apple, or that where there's smoke, there isn't fire? I don't understand that argument at all. But even if true, you must apply it to God. Let's say for instance, I'm asking David to explain where the buck stops when it comes to reason. He says, reason, if you can reason or if we can have consciousness, therefore God. It seems like to me, wherever the buck stops, there's going to be a problem. Did God create logic? Or is he bound by it? Must God obey logic, the logical rules of yes and no to tautologies, all of them, or does he create logic? Does God create logic like he creates morality? Does he create morality? These kinds of questions, wherever the buck stops with regard to morality or logic or consciousness, is God consciousness of his own consciousness? If he's eternal, if he's infinite, how can he be conscious of his own consciousness? The same kinds of problems that you ask me to explain without a God are your problems when it comes to God. Now, I call that a wash. You see, I call it a wash. And for me, that affirms agnosticism. That simply says, well, you know what? I don't know. I don't know what to affirm. I don't know if there's a scientific God or an evil God. I don't know if there's none at all. Maybe we should trust science a little bit more to go and to answer these sorts of questions, because those don't work. And when it comes to consciousness, he must assume there's a soul. You know what? I can change your mind very easily with a crowbar to the head. Boom! What happens? I've deadened parts of your brain and you can no longer use them, and it's very, very effective for changing your mind on things. A stroke will do that. And a stroke and a crowbar to the head disconfirms the hypothesis we have a soul. Because when parts of our brain die or when they get injured, you can no longer think the same. That seems to me to suggest that all we have are brains. You can posit a soul all you want. The evidence suggests otherwise. Sam Harris, I like him. He said, you know what? If we have minds, then we don't even need brains. We don't even need brains. Why would we need brains? The mind apparently does all the work, right? And where is my mind? Maybe it's here. Maybe I'm being facetious. But it seems like to me that we don't need brains if we have minds. Why would we need brains? If we have minds, dispense with the brains. So all these questions I'm throwing his way just as he throws my way. Now you say, well, you haven't maybe answered all of his questions. Well, no, but let me ask him to answer my questions. What I'm saying is that it comes out as a wash. And I think that we ought to be agnostics. Now, intelligent design. This world does not look intelligently designed. Plate tectonics with the Earth's crust moving that destroy people. We gravitated toward plate tectonics. We gravitated toward earthquake zones. Why? Because out of them they spewed forth oil and water and minerals. The Bronze Age came from areas where we dug holes in the faults of the earth. We need them. They spit forth the minerals, right? But then, lo and behold, every once in a while, there's an earthquake or a tornado that destroys a whole population. Now, you would think that if there was a God, he would say, now, go ahead and mine the minerals there, but be careful because, every few centuries or so, you're going to die. Istanbul and Los Angeles are going to be destroyed probably in someone here's lifetime. Why? Because we've been attracted to them. And now it would seem like to me there should be some better way for a perpetual miracle God to give us those sorts of things other than, it's like honey, it's like nectar to a bee, having these faults around the earth. We are drawn to them and then boom, we get destroyed. And how do you think we discovered that lead poisoning kills us? How do you think we discovered that the brown recluse spider will kill you? God didn't tell you. Someone had to die. Someone had to die from scorpion bite. Someone had to die from a number of things. There's so many plants and they're so poisonous, but we had to die. And you know what? In each geographical location, you see, because we didn't have mass media. Well, someone would die over here, oops, let's not eat out of that anymore. And someone would die over here, and in other parts of the planet, oops, let's not eat there. And sometimes a whole expeditions I read about that were traveling across the land died from lead poisoning because they found a new way to can food and they developed lead poisoning. Well, that's how God teaches us. See, that's not my kind of God. It does not seem intelligently designed. And if it was, you'd think they would give us the information for penicillin or vaccines for tuberculosis, but we don't even find that in the Bible. Now there is some evidence, as David says, but I just think that I'm going to let science work with it. I'm not going to all of a sudden posit a God. And he talks about aliens and says, if you apply this reasoning, what could you ever believe? Well, that is my point. To suppose that aliens did it, and we all laughed. I didn't, because they didn't like it being the front of his joke. But when he suggested that aliens could have done this, or aliens could have done that, as a God's gaps explanation, and he had us all laughing, that is my point. If you apply that reasoning, what could you ever believe? Why does he think that the God hypothesis is any better than the alien hypothesis? He would have to explain that. Now he says that I don't accept science, and I do. I just think science takes a long time to work out its solutions. I mean, after all, he said there are some things that can't possibly be explained. Well, you know what? In the history of the world, there were people like David who said that you can't possibly explain this. You can't possibly explain that, too. Like disease and why it happened. Well, God sent it. You know, why the rain occurred? Well, because God sent it. You can't possibly try to explain it. It's been the same answer down through the centuries, but science came around and said, you know what, we're going to try to explain it. So all these things don't seem to hold water to me, and it looks like I've got 58 seconds, so I can do anything I want with them, and I'm thinking as I'm talking that maybe I should say something, maybe I should sit down, maybe I should just, pause for a moment of silence. I haven't yet figured out what to do. But I can't really see anything else to say. Is there anything else I missed? Probably a lot. I can't answer all of his objections in a debate. And he cannot answer all of mine. These debates are educational and informative. It's too bad I'm the one doing the education. Thank you.